So where do you start if you want to get into Monster Hunter? There's so many of these. This franchise has been around for over a decade and somehow no one ever recommends I just start with the first. I don't know, maybe Capcom doesn't know. Maybe they just wanted to throw their arms up in the air and start the whole shebang over again. Monster Hunter World is the 14th or something game in the Monster Hunter series. I mean, it's the 5th if you don't count the spin-offs, though why they didn't call it a Monster Hunter 5 is anyone's guess. Because despite the World subtitle, it doesn't exactly shove in any kind of giant open-world blob fields or MMO features. Maybe it's not Monster Hunter 5 because it's kind of a technical and visual reboot of the series, which have all retained an incredibly similar quality fidelity since the original PS2 release in 2004, though the games really bottled their lightning with the portable releases, enhanced releases, remixed Hyper HD re-releases, spin-offs, visual novels, Chinese-only MMO, greatest hit compilation albums that have had something with this intellectual property stamped on it coming out at least once a year for every year for the past 13 years. And no matter what year it is, this year's Monster Hunter will be somewhere on Japan's top sellers list. All that long-running commercial success has to mean they're doing something right. I've always considered this franchise as a kind of Japanese Call of Duty. It's a reliable money-making staple of a grinding game Skinner box, except first-person gunplay is replaced with lovingly detailed third-person melee martial arts and the eating of delicious food. The bad guys are reminiscent of campy kaiju monsters, and the competitive kill-or-be-killed multiplayer ladder is more of a cooperative game, pockmarked with occasionally quiet moments of naturistic appreciation. But how the hell did it get so popular? I can't really say I've witnessed that myself. Despite the sheer breadth of games in this series, any single one can become a titan of a time commitment. These numbers scared me away for years. I finally picked up Monster Hunter Generations on the 3DS and have played about 80 hours of it over the past year, and even though that means I'm no newcomer to World, I still feel like I've barely been introduced to the series. After all those hours, there are still systems in both games I still don't know and may never will. There are people who play hundreds of hours of this stuff who probably have it all figured out by then, but the sheer amount of content, variety, and yes, depth and complexity explain why. Even this early on, I can tell that these games can be a very, very rewarding pastime to get into. Why is this stuff so popular? I have a few theories. Let's start with the playstyles. In Monster Hunter World alone, you've got 14 different weapon movesets that change your controls in a fundamental Soul Calibur sort of way that feels like a completely different game. You've got a few ranged gun weapons here that more resemble a third-person shooter playstyle. Hell, there's even a horn with playable songs for players who want to pretend they're doing a rhythm game thing. Many of these have their own meter management metagames going on, with resource management and hidden combos and flashy special attacks. There's something for everyone. They all feel weighty, satisfying, and certainly visceral to hammer out some damage once you finally work your way into these precious opportunistic moments where you can really lay down the DPS. Which brings me to the second aspect of Monster Hunter I've fallen in love with. It's the pacing of these hunts. As an ostensibly cooperative game, Monster Hunter presents jumbo-sized challenges for a party of multiple players. Your main enemies are all bosses, who have a lot more HP than they do in most single-player games, so each fight is a truly epic 20 to 40 minute back-and-forth tug-of-war of progress, with the ebb and flow of victory coming and going from this lengthy, sustained effort of maintaining your sense of direction and muscle memory while having to visually track fast-moving enormous body parts that take up the whole screen. It may be cliche to say it, but screw 'em. Dark Souls has a lot of Monster Hunter DNA inside of it. Adjust the damage value so that these monsters aren't hitting for ridiculous amounts, and you are in for a treat. Somehow, some way, they have made it look like it makes sense when these dinosaurs crash into the earth and it merely grazes your health meter. These may be half-hour-long boss fights, but during these micro second-by-second moments, you're at the edge of your seat. Taking a single bad hit can turn the whole fight south, but animations this slow and heavy mean that taking just a few steps back is all you gotta need to give yourself room to breathe. Which actually doesn't count the entire minutes that you spend tracking the monster, across huge outdoor maps pockmarked with spots for them to escape and get some quiet time to eat and sleep and make some kind of recovery.
Wow, got him there.
Unless you're quick on your feet and choose not to let them rest, Unless you're stealthy on your feet and stalk them for a surprise ambush when they rest and let their guard down. Unless you just want to use that time to gather up craftables, rethink your strategies, and kind of fully recover your own self. And to put it bluntly, all that means that the minute-by-minute flow of a good long monster hunt has just plain excellent pacing. Seconds of highs glide into minutes of lows that give plenty of opportunity for grand reversals of fortune when things are going awry, with plenty of that always important quiet time giving you a minute to think about your next move, which you actually gotta do. Being a slow, heavy-hitting, Soulsborne-y kind of melee combat game already means that the combat's tactical, but miraculously, Monster Hunter is strategic and cerebral as well. It requires good use of tools, timing, and intuition, and also pattern recognition. There's a real sense of mastery to both learning your greatest weapon combos and exactly where and when to use them on each particular monster. Damaging different body parts deactivates certain moves, or it can throw the monsters into a rage or a panic, all of which can be exploited with a number of gadgets that comprise a mixed bag of versatility alongside more specific tools. Take, for example, literal feces. This can be crafted into dung pods that you shoot at monsters to make them run away. The immediately obvious use seemed to be getting intruding monsters to back away from my mark, but in a pinch they can be used as a life-saving defensive tool, making your monster run away from you if you want them to. But give chase after them, and suddenly you've turned that defensive tool into an offensive tool, as you pepper them with projectile damage from that safe distance. That damage really adds up in the long term. This is a beautifully cheeky trick, and I felt like such a smartass when I discovered it. But what's new for Monster Hunter World are those moments where you'd even need to repel two monsters away from each other in the first place. Those AI systems make this a kind of benchmark, not just for the series, but for gaming itself.
I'm surprised you got this far. The jungle doesn't usually let its prey go that easily.
Few games have truly realized the feeling of being lost in a living, breathing forest. But the areas of Monster Hunter World cram a density and a level of interaction with a sheer quantity of AIs that I don't believe I've seen anywhere else. And the wonderful thing about that is that their interactivity creates opportunities for constantly thinking up dynamic new strategies on the go as you play. Some little animals can function as environmental hazards, and some as environmental helpers. And at any given time, the minimap is tracking the movement of tens of different animals, moving in and out of your fight by the herd with different behaviors of their own that you can oftentimes exploit. Knock a monster down near some bottom feeders and they will rush over to the scene. But as a katana main, including those poor souls in my sweeps just helps me build meter faster. And just like in my favorite game of all time, you can capture the little critters and learn fun facts about them and even keep them as little personable pets because everything, even the useless stuff, still has to have a use by this game's rules. But the real beauty of having so many AIs share such tight quarters isn't just the beauty of a lot of beautiful ass looking fights. It's the dynamism that it all adds to the experience. For many of those opening levels, you'll be running away from this Tyrannosaur as it chases both you and your real objective target. It's like a Pac-Man ghost, always on your trail through these tunnels, so you'll be changing your routes and circling around and covering your tracks to avoid this guy while on the way to this guy, while kinda just sorta hoping you can make this guy do a lot of the work for you at the same time. That's just one example of how many different ways things can go once you're in a fight. That's not just an iteration on the series, but it's also a kind of unique feeling you don't get from many other games. And that's why Monster Hunter feels more cerebral than before. I'm now constantly thinking and looking and even hearing for useful stuff in my peripheral vision. I'm not just hammering out the same combos over and over again. Well, I still am, but there's way more tricks and tactics and strategies to learn. More mundane examples of stuff they added to World include damage numbers, so now you can know if bounce back hits still count or not. There's still no health bar, but the team still knows there's not supposed to be. Gauging the monster's health by its movement is way easier than before, but I like having hard, concrete, mathematical evidence that I am doing some damage, so that's nice. It's also nice that just holding down B vacuums up loot even as you full sprint past it. That's another little trick that improves the pacing and flow, as well as the strategic motif of keeping an eye out for all the littler interactions they've crammed in these places. All of this saves players tons of time and confusion that would have been spent with trial and error strategy guide lookups, plus all that time I spent holding down the gather button forever. All things considered, while this might not be Monster Hunter at its most complex, it's still Monster Hunter new and improved. It's gratifying how many features still made it through the generational shift, and I didn't really find any of these changes offensive, sans the game lacking the sheer quantity of content I've been enjoying with Generations, but that's not really a fair comparison. But what I did find offensive was this blight, this bloat, this horrible curse that has plagued this poor soul's existence for far too long, and something that needs to be stamped out sooner rather than later. If you've always wanted to get into Monster Hunter but found it too intimidating, I don't blame you? I mean, look at this. Menus and interface are the Achilles heel of the experience. I have had the time of my life with this game, but somehow I feel like a good half of my mic chatter and streaming comments and whatever are nitpicks and complaints over the menus. Remember how I said both Generations and World have systems that I still don't understand after tens of hours of playing? A mystifying mess of menus, some truly terrifying terminology, and thinly traced tutorials bury those concepts under much higher of a learning curve than there needs to be. At any one time, you have to juggle around the differences between an investigation versus an expedition, a provision stockpile versus a resource center, the smithy versus the armory, all of which are these workstations in a town hub that somehow is not called a gathering hub. Sure, I got used to it eventually. I just wonder if this very synonymous naming convention is purely a translation issue, but what's more inexcusable is that this team is somehow demonstrating the same kind of confusion for online interfaces and experiences that you rarely see outside the Nintendo eShop. An online session is what would normally be called a lobby, I think? Except there's grand amounts of separation between players who can't even see each other and talk with each other outside of selected tiny rooms, and, believe it or not, the chat menu, which is hidden behind the pause menu. Meeting up and playing with strangers was a borderline impossibility, first of all because of the low player count of doing it pre-release with an early review copy. Second of all, because there's not really a server browser or a lobby browser, you're just kind of at the mercy of matchmaking searches. But even hooking up with specific friends was unreliable. Although I can attest that this game is very, very enjoyable solo, you're not really seeing all there is to see. The spark may not really hit you. You might not get hooked until you see all that strategy and interaction combined with other players doing the same. Further salting the wound is that many aspects of this online experience were better in previous games. The worst of it is that you can't play through the game's co-op story missions sequentially, one after another, with a friend who is at the same point in the story as you. And for a game so explicitly designed as a co-op online experience, that is a flaw. That is user experience cacophony. I can only assume the story was meant to be played solo. There is a hard block in the way of an actual error message, but the story includes these siege levels that are truly terrible experiences to play alone, stuff that is visibly designed to be full of other players. Unlike 99.9% of every other second of every other quest in the game, these missions are set-piece scripted events of obfuscated story scene triggers, unclear objectives, and flavor text that lies right to your face. Thankfully, they're just like a 0.1% minority. And thankfully, if you happen to play this game while it's still active, you might be able to get some strangers in there with you. I'm just not so lucky. But the menus, oh, the menus, they'll continue to haunt. That's a curse that's gonna follow this game. For example, picking and choosing a weapon style that's right for you is going to require you to spend a lot of time outside a quest in a little training forest glade that you can only get to by talking to the cat in your bedroom for some reason. At which point you're about to do a lot of back and forth between start, hunter's notes, oh then there's a little pause slowing us down. Now you're allowed to see your own weapon controls. So I was really excited to try out this radial menu feature. It makes inventory management in the middle of battle way faster than sorting through the linear lists of old, but I kept having this issue where my assigned items wouldn't save their places. I legitimately thought this was a glitch, but it turns out you gotta go to your item box, create a custom loadout, save it, name it, then go back to your radial menu, fix it the way you like, then go back to your item box, save it, because apparently the way you set up your abstract, non-teleological floating video game menu of hotkeys counts as a custom loadout of items your guy is keeping in his pockets. Oh, speaking of which, the PC version has hotkeys! Huzzah! But yeah, no, the menus are still really dumb and stupid, and I hate them, and this is the best game I've played in years! And I wasn't expecting to like Monster Hunter as much as I am. If you followed the channel for a while, you should know that this 2010's trend of menu-driven grindy game Skinner boxes is something I typically abhor. The artificiality of those experiences is not gone in Monster Hunter World. The fact that this will be a grindy game of repetitive farming is made front and clear in the center. But the difference is that once you're away from the town, away from the menus, and you're totally in the game and on the hunt, it feels a lot more like a skill-dependent combat action game rather than something determined by this trickle of ever-increasing numbers. The action is diverse, strategic, dynamic, with quite a lot of unpredictability thrown in to make hunts play quite differently each time. But each time, though, it will look and feel and sound fantastic. When the combat is this good, and the pacing this fun, that grind does not have to feel like a grind. And that's why I think Monster Hunter World is now going to be my new staple multiplayer game.